Yeah. Good evening, everybody. My name is Willie Docto. I'm very pleased to and honored to be hosting as moderator this evening. I want to thank Representative Dara Torrey for inviting me to do this. This is my third year. I guess she likes my work. I don't know. But I'm happy to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I know several of you, but I've been a resident of Duxbury since 1996, when my husband Greg Trilson and I bought a piece of property that we turned into the Moose Meadow Lodge, which is a bed and breakfast. And so thankful that we live in such a beautiful area and with wonderful people. So just to get an idea, Tom, can you turn up the volume? Just to get an idea of who's here, I'd like to know what towns you all are from. So let's say from Warren, Waitsfield, Fayston, Moortown, raise your hand. Wow, okay, great. How about Duxbury, Waterbury, Bolton, Buellscore? Okay, good. And then Montpelier, East Montpelier, Middlesex, anybody from there? Okay, good. What's that? Berlin. Oh, good, thank you. Okay, yeah. Any select board members? No select board members. School board members and superintendents? Quite a few. Teachers? Yay, okay, terrific. How about, let's see, oh, taxpayers, any taxpayers in here? Oh, good. How about IRS agents? Okay, those who didn't raise their hands are safe. So, all right. This is an opportunity for us to come together as a community and engage in a meaningful conversation with our local elected officials. And by the way, I want to mention that we are streaming live on MRV TV, and it's also being recorded. So at some point when you have a chance to come up and ask a question, we'd like you to use the microphone instead of shouting your question from your seat. Okay. What you read or see in the media doesn't always provide a full picture, nor the nuance of the challenges that our government officials tackle daily. This is why our local legislators are here to meet with you, their constituents, so that you have an opportunity to hear directly from them and they from you. I'm confident that this will be a productive and insightful discussion. Our panelists have not only a wealth of expertise, but also the ability to affect change in Montpelier. Our legislators are here tonight because they understand the importance of connecting with community members. They're committed to listening to your concerns, communicating progress and challenges, and helping to connect the dots on how issues are interrelated. As moderator, I'll do my best to manage diverse perspectives and ensure that we have a productive dialogue. While opinions of one person may differ from another person, I encourage you to keep the discussion focused on issues and avoid personal remarks. Remember, we are all here to inquire, learn, listen, and share solutions. The agenda will be as follows. First, I'm going to ask each legislator to introduce themselves, their committee assignments, and more importantly, what they see as their top 1 or 2 accomplishments this session. I will then ask questions related to bills, specifically those related to education reform, healthcare, and housing. I will then ask questions, then we'll provide you an opportunity to ask questions and to bring up topics that may not have been covered. Our legislators know that there's a lot of fear, especially from parents, with regard to children's welfare and education. We recognize your concerns and hope to address them tonight. We will try to cover as many topics as possible, so to ensure a productive conversation, I kindly request the audience to prepare your question so that it is succinct and to the point. I'm sure we'll run out of time before we run out of things to talk about. So let's get started. So we can do this from left to right. Representative Tom Stevens, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm Representative Tom Stevens. I live in Waterbury, and this is not our district, though we, of course, as part of Waterbury, we are part of the Harwood family, and that's why we're here. Representative Wood sends her regrets right now. She had 2 events scheduled for tonight. She may join us if she can. I live in downtown Waterbury. My kids all went to school at Harwood. I have served in the legislature now for 17 years. That's 8.5 terms. And this is the first year I've served on the Appropriations Committee after 16 years on the General and Housing Committee, which handled affordable housing, military affairs for a while, labor issues, union issues, and non-union issues for labor. Under the general rubric, we did everything from Abenaki recognition to elevator safety in that committee. Anything that kind of fell off the table from any other committee that didn't quite fit came into that committee. So it was a big change for me to end up on the Appropriations Committee this year, and it was a learning curve. I have ADD, and I can tell you that looking at Excel sheets does not make me want to sing out loud, as some people can when they look at spreadsheets. But I learned, and we worked in the Appropriations Committee on the periphery of the Policy Committee. So a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight has to do with specific policy, of which I have strong opinions. But in the work that we did, it was pretty much trying to make sure that we were passing a budget that could get not only signed by the governor, but that is balanced, because that is, being stewards of your money is really of the utmost importance for the money committees. So that's what I was able to do. I mean, in terms of specific programs, it's actually, we're still at the kind of hard part of the post session, where I'm thinking more about the things that we weren't able to do and how money was used, because when it came to excess money in the general fund, there were $77 million that got pushed forward to be used to buy down your increases in your property taxes. The governor chose that he pretty much demanded that $77 million to be used to buy down the property tax increase after such a huge increase last year. And there's a piece of that I'm saying that's fair. But on the other hand, it's $77 million that didn't go to programs that were really important to us all. And I won't go into the weeds on that right now, but just as an example of what the change was from last year's election, which came after this large increase, and the Democratic Party, of all of whom we serve in, we lost our supermajority. And while we tried to approach our work as we'll reach across the aisle, as I think we always do, and it was so this conversation tonight and throughout the year about education in particular, but any of the items that are on the agenda, there's a difference, and I want us to pay attention to that. I want you to just pay attention to the difference between policy and politics, because that's the world we live in. So the idea of what we think is right or what we should have done on any particular bill is going to have a balance of what do we think the governor would sign or the Senate would agree with, or there's a process. And so for all of my idealism on any particular issue, that has to get tempered by the reality of the politics and the policy together. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank
and
you.
Look forward to having this conversation this evening.
Thank you. We have lots of things to talk about. So if you could each take 2 minutes to introduce yourselves, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ann Watson. I'm one of the 3 senators from the Washington district. This is my 2nd term. I am this year serving as the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. It's formerly the vice chair. I also serve on the Appropriations Committee as well in the Senate. And a couple of the top accomplishments that I feel like we got done this year, especially being the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. That was always sort of top of mind for me. And so a couple of things that we did there. One, while it was not our bill per se, we did have a hand in moving forward a housing bill, which I think is going to be really beneficial, particularly to rural places in terms of allowing what we would call mini TIFs, basically allowing people to take advantage of some tax structure to get projects built around the state. So I'm really excited about that. And then in the natural resources community, we protected clean water in 3 different bills, and I think that was something that we all want for Vermont, is to have clean water. And so, in terms of stormwater runoff off of farms, and in terms of off of properties with the 3-acre rule, making that more financially viable for homeowners, and then also in terms of we're still technically working on this, but I believe we're going to be passing a bill early next year about protecting our roads and our waterways from salts, from creating an optional program for commercial salt applicators to opt into, that would help them learn about best management practices for salt spreading, because all of our major waterways in Vermont are experiencing an increase in the amount of salt contamination, which is, of course, is not great for our local habitats. So that's it for me. I will pass along.
Thank you, Senator Watson. Candace White is our newest member of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, thank you. So I hope it's okay if I sit. So my name is Candace White. As Willie said, I am a freshman legislator, a representative for Washington County 2, so for the 5 towns, Medford Valley and Duxbury and Moortown. And I sit on the Transportation Committee, and I also am a member of the Women's Caucus and the Rural Caucus. The other piece that I participated in quite heavily was back in the fall, after the election in November, there was kind of like a subgroup in the House that started meeting weekly to talk about education reform. And so that was a weekly meeting that we ran kind of through March sometime. So Transportation Committee is pretty far removed from education, but I knew that was a very important topic to everyone. So I was involved with that as well. The Transportation Committee we work on 2 bills for the entire session. One is the transportation bill, and one is the Department of Motor Vehicles bill. So I had a pretty big learning curve being a new legislator. Learned a lot about what happened, everything that's a part of transportation, from airports, railways, highways, bridges, rail trails, and then of course the DMV, driver's licenses, real IDs, etc. So, a couple takeaways from my work on the Transportation Committee. Number one is that we sit on, that budget is about $880 million. And the revenue coming into the Transportation Agency of Transportation is declining pretty steadily. And that is because, as we are seeing more fuel efficient cars around Vermont and more electric vehicles, which is great for the environment, but it's not good for our revenue, because we rely on the gas tax to fund paving highways and so forth. So we're facing a pretty big declining revenue. And so that was a kind of a key takeaway. And I think I'll leave it at that for right now.
Thank you, Representative White. Senator Cummings.
Okay, thank you. I'm Ann Cummings. I'm a senior senator, and I chair finance. I have for a number of years. We are responsible for revenue raising, i.e. taxes, And part of that is the education fund and property taxes. So last year, everyone wanted to talk about property taxes. I was hoping this year I would not be in the center of it, but we do education taxes. I was on the committee of conference for the education bill. The tax portion of that bill went through my committee. And so I have a feeling you'll have some questions about that one this evening. My other committee is health and welfare. And this year we did 3 bills that should have a major impact. We are hopeful that by next year they will be able to reduce the cost of health insurance. We've got at least 1 more year to get Blue Cross Blue Shield back on their feet. But we've done reference-based pricing is included in one of them. The other one really gives the Green Mountain Care Board some teeth. We have, I believe it's 14 hospitals. 13 of them are in various shades of red or pink, and we have one that's solidly in the black. And it's the one that is solidly in the black that also has some of the highest or the highest prices in the country that we need to get a handle on, because those charges are driving up the cost of our health insurance, and it has reached the breaking point, as I think many of you know, definitely playing a role in the cost of education. So we worked on those, and they should be having an effect very quickly. So be happy to talk about the rest of it.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. You are in the center of a lot of issues. Just reading your list of committees.
Yes, I'm Andrew Perchlik. I'm the 3rd senator from the Washington district, representing the 21 towns and 2 cities of the district. I live in the town of Marshfield. This is my 4th term, so I've been in there 7 years. In the morning, I'm in the Senate Transportation, so the other side of where Rep. White is on. So I won't talk about those transportation issues. I think overall, what I'm most proud of for the legislature is the housing work that Senator Watson mentioned and the healthcare work that Senator Cummings mentioned. I think those are going to 2 of the biggest areas that have the most positive impact on Vermonters' lives. What I worked on almost all my time, even though it's on 2 committees, I spent way over half my time as chair of Senate Appropriations, working on a budget adjustment, 2 bills that got vetoed by the governor. Things have changed a lot in the Senate. We had 22 Democrats to 8 Republicans, and this year we had 16 to 12. So it was, or 16 to 14. So it's a much different setup. So I worked a lot with the minority party and with the governor more than I have before, having to reach a compromise on the budget. Even though he had those 2 vetoes over the housing program and the Budget Adjustment Act, we were able to get what we needed in the budget and get that passed without a governor's veto. And I think still did some good work for Vermonters in that. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Perchlik.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dara Torrey. I'm the other state rep for the Washington 2 district. I've enjoyed working with Candace this year in the State House. This is my 2nd term, and I'm on a new committee. It's the Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. It's a committee they used to have in the past, but didn't have last term. So a lot of my work was really coming up to speed on digital infrastructure, which is actually really fun because you get to learn about all of the IT projects in state government. So, you know, it's an area that's so important in how we deliver government services now. Your experience online means a lot. And these projects tend to be very complicated and very expensive. So we were learning about the kinds of oversight that we're going to want to develop in the years ahead. And one of the bills we passed was about how to increase transparency so we understand the public can see into some of these projects and how they're going. And then the other thing we spent a lot of time on in committee was really trying to understand our climate policy. As you may be aware, there were some bills coming from the administration that wanted to kind of roll back some of our goals on climate. So we really took time to understand them as a new committee. We had new people who weren't familiar with our work in the past. So we did a lot of level setting. And we did pass one bill that came from Senator Watson, and I think Senator Persick may have worked on it as well, which was a solar bill that would just basically make backyard solar installations a little easier to get. As solar panels have gotten better technologically, you can get more production from the same footprint. So that was a good bill to work on. But mostly for me, I would say the takeaway was really trying to get my head around, along with Candace White, our healthcare system. Because of the closure of our clinic, really a crisis point for us as a community, trying to understand who is the Green Mountain Care Board, what is regulatory authority for healthcare in Vermont. So we did a lot of learning, and we actually had a session here on healthcare, and we plan to have more of them. And I hope we'll have time to talk about healthcare tonight as well. And then the other big complex sector that I'm not that familiar with is education, other than as a parent who, my children both went to Harwood and great experiences in our school system, but understanding the complexity of this reform effort has been a challenge, I think, for all of us. The ambition behind it, the fear. So I'm in learning mode along with everyone here in the room, and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Representative Tory. So let's start off with something light, like H454. Okay, I know this is a huge bill that kept you all up at night a lot. It stirred up a lot of anxiety with the community. So before I ask my question, let me just say a few things. So this was a huge bill, and the critics claim that the bill does not address controlling the core cost drivers in education. It does not reduce property taxes. It punishes school districts that have been fiscally responsible. It moves the power from local voters to a small group of bureaucrats at the state government. The bill was voted on by a voice vote, so House members are not on record as to how they voted. And it was strong-armed by 2 senators in the conference committee who are closely tied to independent schools, thus giving private schools public benefits. Is that enough? So, is there anything good about this bill? Senator Cummings, would you like to start?
Maybe we can start with some of the misinformation that got out thanks to the internet, and everybody gets all the information rightly or wrongly. And to start with, this bill really has a lot of numbers, has a lot of aspiration. If you want to know what the bill is intended to do, read the intent. As I said last year, we were here looking at an 18% property tax increase. It's down to 5%, but I know Harwood was really being pressured and had to make cuts in the budget to get the budget passed. It took a couple of budget cuts. I know other schools have done the same. And so schools are being pressured to cut programs, to cut teachers, to cut amenities in order to get their budget passed. That budget pressure is really hurting. We are anticipating another double-digit tax increase next year. And we are anticipating that schools will once again be pressured to make cuts that are probably educationally unwise. We also know that the property tax burden has reached one of the highest in the nation, and that it's become a detriment. It's keeping people from affording housing because your property and insurance is figured into your ability to pay your property taxes. And it's, we have gotten ourselves in this spiral, and the goal is to stop it. We were working with, again, very divided caucuses. We knew we had to have a bipartisan bill that some people from both parties could vote for, and we knew we had to have one that the governor would vote for. That was somewhat challenging. The governor wanted to make big changes quickly. We managed to slow things down. What this bill does essentially is, it says our intent is to go to larger, more efficiently operable districts. Washington County, I discovered, is kind of plain vanilla. I mean, other than Roxbury driving past the Northfield School to get to Montpelier, we're pretty, we're kind of a hub and spoke. We've got schools and feeding schools. But if you look at it statewide, between the supervisory unions, the supervisory districts, the plain districts, the operating schools, the partially operating schools, the tuitioning schools, the choice schools, the no choice schools, schools that use private academies as their public high school, you start to see a picture of a system. I used to say Rube Goldberg, but nobody knows who that is. So I'll say Dr. Seuss it would take a Dr. Seuss kind of mind to create. It isn't efficient, and it is, we've got a lot of duplication. We're also dealing with an aging population, a stagnant population, and the fact that we've lost 40,000 students in the last 20 years. That's just the hand we've been dealt. So we're trying to find a way to stop this. It's really cost spiral. That's not, it's hurting kids, it's hurting taxpayers, and in some communities, it's tearing them apart. Just the fighting over the schools. What the bill does, it says states our intent to go to a foundation formula. That is a form that is used by 48 other states. Vermont and Minnesota are outliers. And a foundation formula, the state determines how much money each school gets per student. Most states do not do 100%. Our bill calls for what is an empirically derived number. There are several national experts who have computer programs that they put in. We have used Professor Tammy Colby from UVM. We've used Larry Pikus, who is another national expert in the past. The governor has used him this time, and then the governor has PPA. They're another group that kind of just mashes around. They were not overly impressive. But we have, Professor Colby has set the number of, if you were to adequately educate every student in this state, according to her computer program, you should be spending $15,033 per student. That's what her numbers say. That got plugged in to the bill, and that is under this system of districts and the whole Dr. Seuss type system. This is what you should be spending. Our Joint Fiscal Office, for informational purposes, did a run and said, okay, if you did this, this is what it would look like in every one of your towns. That run, since we're all on live and YouTube, got spread out to everybody in the state, and everybody went crazy because half of the schools would have to spend several $1,000s less per student, or they'd have to spend several thousand more, i.e. Barry would be looking at a 30% tax increase. Nobody ever proposed to put those basin weights in on the present system. They are really there as a placeholder. When Tammy Colby inflated the weights when we did the weighting on 27 3 years ago, if she'd used the NIPA, which is the National Inflation Gauge, that the rest of this bill calls for everything, the number would have come in at 1443. So that's, the numbers are all over the place.
If I could interrupt
Yeah.
you 1 second.
Yeah.
The governor had proposed in February a rate of 13,000.
Yes.
And so can you explain the difference?
Yes, 13 something is the Larry Pikus numbers. Larry Pikus has done work for the state in the past. And his numbers are based on, and again, he has a computer algorithm model that says if you set up the ideal structure, this is what it would cost to educate a kid. I've called that Shangri-La. Nobody's ever going to be the ideal. I think every teacher in the state would give their right arm for the kind of supports that Larry Pikus has built into his model. So, yeah, we've got the governor at 13. We've got some people at 15. What this bill does is it says, we are going to move forward this summer, and we are going to map out districts. Once the districts are mapped out, then we can recalculate the numbers. We can see, it depends on the property value within the districts, the high spending, low spending. But until we do those districts, all numbers are aspirational. They will all change. If we get those districts up, and it isn't possible, then we're back to the drawing table. But this is an attempt. Every other state, for better or for worse, for every 48 states, there is a different, what's inside the foundation formula is different. We are going to try and craft a Vermont style foundation. And at some point, I'd like to address the giveaway to private schools.
Sure. Does anyone else want to address the foundation formula first?
I was just going to answer the question about, is there anything good in the bill? I think there are two things that I can think of. And that is the new property classification system. I think that moving to being able to tax second homes, what this will set us up to do, it doesn't do it, but it provides us that opportunity to do that, which will help reduce property taxes or fund schools adequately, or both. And then there's also a new way of dealing with income sensitizing the property tax that I think will be fair and offer more tax relief to more middle and lower income Vermonters once that gets set up as well. So those are the two good things in there.
Okay. I'd also like to add a few things. So in terms of what I saw to be good in the bill, I think just the very fact of going to a foundation formula, moving away from every school board having to decide their own budget, vote that in every year, that this allows the state to say, here's how many students you have, here's what you've got, you go, you figure out how to spend it. So to me, I feel like taking that pretty big responsibility off of volunteer boards across the state, telling them how much they have to spend, and then allowing them to make decisions about kind of the creative aspects of how they're running their schools. I think that's a good thing. Now, in terms of how the new school boards and how the public will interact with in this new system, a lot of that is still to be decided. The Commission on the Future of Public Education has been tasked with figuring out over the next 6 months how the school boards and the public will kind of interact in this new system. And our superintendent, Dr. Legislator, who's here tonight, is on that commission. I hope he continues on that commission because, you know, I think we all have a lot of confidence in his ability to think really thoughtfully about this new system. Other things I think that are beneficial in the bill, establishing new minimum class sizes. You know, we have some very small schools in Vermont. I'm not really talking about, I mean, part of the bill is looking at preserving small elementary schools and really looking at having larger high schools. And so, you know, we have small elementary schools in the Valley, and I think they're all wonderful. You know, will we have to close one of those? Maybe, I don't know. There is a very long ramp for closing a school. I think it's like 2 or 3 years right now. So it's not a sudden thing, and we'll be working on ways to work with communities to help them figure out what to do with a school if they have to close it. But, you know, we have wonderful schools here. My kids went to public school here. One went to Warren Elementary, one went to Waitsfield for part of the time. They're both wonderful. So anyway, I think we have a lot of good options. And, you know, but schools that have classes of like 4 students or 5 students, there is data to prove that that is not an ideal learning situation for kids, that higher class sizes are more dynamic, there's more discussion, et cetera. I'm not an educator, I'm not pretending I am, but, you know, the committees that were working on these bills were taking that kind of testimony to back up what they were doing. You know, establishing graduation requirements that are across the state, that are, you know, that all schools have to conform to, that are receiving public dollars. I think that's very beneficial. You know, establishing a school construction budget. And there's been a lot of criticism, well, there's no funding of that. Well, it's true. And, you know, we're facing there's not a lot of extra money right now in the State House, but at least this is a mechanism to start developing a school construction budget. And there is some language about how this will start to get funded, but that, again, that will require more work in the coming years. And I just also want to, so those are some of the things I see as valuable in the bill. The other thing I wanted to just address quickly was the House vote. And that was a little bit of a weird thing. You know, the Senate passed the bill first, it came to the House. One of the representatives asked to, I can't remember the term, but a division. She asked for a division because there was new material in the bill that hadn't been in the conference committee bill. So that can be an opportunity to not vote on the bill. So we addressed that, decided let's vote on the bill. And then there was a pause. And then the speaker said, you know, do you support the bill, or whatever her language was? And there was a yay vote and then a nay vote. And I think maybe some people weren't ready for that. But what happened is we basically drew out the next vote, which was, will you send this on to the governor? And to me, that was kind of a proxy for all the representatives to, you know, go have a roll call vote, say, you know, how they were voting, and then to offer an explanation if they wanted to. So I think that was a pretty good reflection of what the roll call vote would have been on the actual education bill. If others disagree with me, go ahead, but that's my take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, go.
Can we hear how people actually voted, since it was a roll call? Would anybody feel willing to say?
Yeah, sure, I'll start. I voted no, and I was going to vote yes on H 454 up until the close of the conference committee. I've served again for 17 years. I voted on Act 46, which is very similar to this conversation. I started my Act 60 passed in 1999 or 2000. It was 1999 because civil unions was 2000, and those were two Supreme Court cases where the Vermont Supreme Court was ruling on the constitutionality in the case of Act 60, what turned out to be Act 60. It was about the foundation formula and how unequal it was, because at that time you had towns like many towns in the valley that were considered gold towns, Stowe in particular up north of here, which is now part of the Senate district. Sorry, I keep boom, boom, boom. So I've listened to the arguments about school reform and high property taxes almost as long as I've lived in Vermont. And I have to say that there's very little in this conversation, starting even when the governor decided to try to take his pound of flesh against Democrats, where it ended up being a situation where we had to do this politically. We had to talk about both taxes, property taxes, school funding, and governance. And the reason I was going to vote for it up until the close of the conference was that I think that the bulk of the bill that the House passed was good. It took all of the things that we have all ever talked about: small schools, rural schools, how many districts, how many teachers, how many students in classrooms, how are we going to pay for this? All of these things, none of them are new. We've been talking about it for longer than Act 60. Governor Snelling was talking about this in the 80s. What I appreciated, and I think what was good about the bill, was that it took these issues and it put them back out on the table 10 years after Act 46. And if you remember Act 46 at all, they were the same issues and they were the same goals, but there were also compromises made that allowed certain things to keep going the way that they were. And then that goes specifically to the public-private schools that really threw a wrench into the conversation in conference here. I voted for Act 46. When I talked to my constituents and the teachers in the schools where my kids were actively going to, and to the school boards at the time, I asked for their trust that what we were setting up was right and that it could work. I was doing that with H454, but by the time all the changes were made in the conference, I had school board members, people I've known for 35 years, coming up to me asking me to vote no. Not because, and I could explain the policies, I could explain, and I'll go into a little bit about 454, about why this is such a hard bill for anybody who's not in the silo of the State House. But I had people looking at me in the face saying, I don't trust you. Not the governor, not the people that I would say, hey, we put in a lot of money for the Agency of Education after Act 46 to help your school districts get it right. And this governor did not fill those positions. We're talking 50 positions that the House and the Senate decided were the right number to provide the kind of staffing that school districts would need to pick up the phone and say, hey, what's going on? How can I help? Can you help me? And right now, and has been since Act 46, the answer is we don't know, because we don't have the capacity to go into your town and figure it out with you. Hearing that from many people, that they don't trust me to tell them the truth about the bill, was more than eye-opening. It was soul-shaking, because I was going into this supporting the committees of jurisdiction, because they were doing the Education Committee, I can't speak for the Senate, the Education Committee in the House and the Ways and Means Committee in the House was doing the kind of work that should have been done right after Act 60 got passed. And it's hard work and it's thankless work, much like school boards work is. It's not a lot of, it's a lot of work for not a lot of money. And the thing that stood out for me, the things that Senator Perchlik said are very important. So the criticism that taxes aren't going down, correct. But the way this bill was set up is that there's got to be X number of years, and that's arguable between the Senate version and what the governor wanted, X number of years to work on the governance issue, because you can't have a tax relief program that's going to stick unless the governance program was fixed. And you can't have a governance program that's going to stick for any longer than a couple of years if we don't fix the education funding situation. So it was predicated on this really tough balance between, we need to get this done in order for, and so in 5 years, 4 or 5 years, when the final pieces would be set with the districts and all the other sizes, and don't forget, all of you who teach, who are in this room tonight, you all have contracts that if we don't respect the length and the size of the contracts, then we're doing you a disservice. It was, in theory, a well-built, if on a framework that was kind of fragile, and the fragility was attacked by politics. And so we ended up with a bill that I couldn't support any longer. I could no longer support the schools like Burr & Burton and St. Johnsbury, the academy, and those schools that take public money anyway and give them less to focus on, less to be accountable for than you do here in this district. And then below that comes other places that want to be independent schools, and the goal to the desire to have a greater school choice. And those things which I felt were covered were taken out and compromised. And compromise is how we get things done in this democracy. But I decided that I could not live with that. I could not live with walking into church and having people look at me and say, you just screwed the schools. I couldn't do it. And I talked to school board members here and got their feelings on it as well. And so it was a hard vote. I mean, my district mate voted for it, and she has excellent reasons why she voted for it. If not now, then when? Is the first one. And I totally respect her decision-making process, and anybody who's sitting here who voted for this. I totally respect their decision-making process. I couldn't do it. I've seen Act 60, Act 68, Act 46, Act 127, all of these things that have been trying to fix their systems. But the system itself is so, I mean, how do you argue about, I was being told that Waterbury is almost like a metropolitan center because we're a big school that doesn't have a problem filling it. And that might be different in Fayston or Warren or Glover or Bolton or Huntington, my other 2 towns. So I voted no. And it was the hardest vote to just process because I wanted to support the committees, but I couldn't support the conference bill. And so that's just one last thing I'll say about the cost, because I heard a lot about we're not addressing the cost drivers. Health insurance is out, for the most part, is really out of our purview as long as it is a private profit-making venture. We can't control that. We can do little things around the edges, but we can't lower the cost of health care or health insurance. So some of these other things just make it more complicated, and this is the politics, but I just feel very strongly about, we were in a difficult position. We made votes that we'll support on our own, but it shouldn't be the only vote you judge us on.
Thank you, Representative Stevens. Senator Watson, thank you for chomping at the bit to speak, but after you will have Senator Cummings speak again. But before that, just a quick poll: who voted no? And the other 2 voted yes. Okay. And if you want to explain at some point this evening why you voted the way you voted, it's fine. But Senator Watson, please.
Sure. Well, I'll just be brief. I voted no, mainly because I felt like this bill was the wrong approach entirely. I thought it was not the mandate that we got in November about lowering property taxes. And so that was the thing that I just had my eye on. So I am really glad actually that it does set up this the possibility for taxing second homes at a different rate in the future. I think that is actually a big step. But I would have preferred to go to try to work on the challenges in making an income-based education funding system work. But I also want to come back to the question about what was good in it. And I think Senator Cummings is going to speak to this about private schools. But there is, my understanding is that there is a provision in there that will reduce, well, that eliminates the possibility of paying for private schools outside of Vermont. And there is quite a bit of that happening now as well.
Thank you. Senator Cummings.
Okay. I guess maybe I've been through this too long. Act 60 came my first year in the legislature. I chaired education for Act 46, and Representative Stevens is right. The ball got dropped. I got moved out the next year back to finance. But I have also chaired a summer study committee on going to an income-based way to finance education. And everyone on that committee wanted it to work. And after going through, I don't know how many dozen spreadsheets and runs, and well, if we do that and we do this, it didn't work. It ended up, you might have hit the higher income, but you also ended up negatively impacting the lower. Beyond that, it is past my math skills. It's another one of those algorithms. But the other thing is income is personal income is the primary tax source for everything else other than transportation and education in the state. There's only so much elasticity. We do not have a large tax base of millionaires. We are going to need that, and that's, I think, probably, maybe Tom was there, legislature who has been through an economic downturn and knows what happens when the economy goes south and you see holes in the safety net. You see people getting hurt. I've twice voted, it's failed, but I've twice voted to do an income surcharge to protect the safety net programs. If we've got any elasticity at the top end, we know we're going to need that if even half of the federal budget cuts come down. We're going to need it to do Medicaid. We're going to need it if housing vouchers go away. The homeless problem we've got now will be a drop in the bucket. We're moving forward, but there is a provision. We will go back in September or October if something really bad happens at the federal level, so that we can take action in an appropriate time frame. We did address health insurance costs this year. We have one major driver, and that's the cost of our largest hospital. We've given Green Mountain Care Board teeth to make them cut the rates that they're charging. We have put in that they can't charge more than 10% above what they pay for infusion drugs. We have examples of the cost being charged at 1,000 times the cost. So, it's that kind of thing. The VNEA tells us it will save teachers' health insurance 3 to 4% as of next year, and that's being reflected in the rates that Green Mountain is setting now. The other rate cutting, we've got an overseer. in there right now, watching all the numbers, making sure that what's being presented to the Green Mountain Care Board is accurate. There's this extreme distrust at this point, but we're working on that. I wanted to address the private schools. And if I were just watching on TV and saw my two conferees, I can understand where people would have the idea that this was some big giveaway to private schools. But let me tell you what it does. On day one, this bill cuts in half the number of private schools that are eligible for state funding. It eliminates out-of-state tuition. No more going to prep school in Massachusetts or Switzerland. So that's a huge step. I mean, we've cut it in half. The schools will not be allowed to charge tuition. They will have to take what's being called the EOP. Only Dr. Seuss could do that. The Educational Opportunity Payment, which is the base plus the weights for each child that goes to a private school. The argument came because this bill does not contain a weight for secondary schools. I don't know if Superintendent Legislator has even seen that yet, because it's not the fine print, it's just not print. And the reason there is a weight now, there has always been a weight, it has always been genuinely accepted that it costs more to educate a student in high school than it does in elementary school, probably because you've got to have chemistry labs and more specialized teachers and all the rest of it. What I was told is that Professor Colby came in January, said, I've updated my base and weights, and I have new evidence that it doesn't cost any more to do secondary students. All right? So there is a study in the bill to see if that is in fact true. But until the study comes in, there is no secondary student weight. The academies, and my co-conferees have two of them, and be very clear, if those academies close, the public system could not absorb them day one. St. Johnsbury is the public high school. I believe Linden is the public high school. I was told half of Bennington County goes to private school. They're not Central Vermont. The academies are losing thousands of dollars a student by having to take the Educational Opportunity Payment. Concern was that if they had to swallow the no weight, because they only have 9-12, they can't move money up from 3rd grade to 12th grade. They're just in their little box. So my folks went to bat, and it was terrible optics. What they got in the end, now to start with, every district, there will be new districts, every district will have the ability to start at spending up to 10% over the base. And that gets ramped down to 5% over, I think it's 5 years. Taxes get ramped up or down. Everything's getting ramped up and down. But you can raise that over your base. You start at 10, you're going to ramp down to 5, which is supposed to help schools adjust if they've been spending a lot. And that's all equalized, so it meets Brigham. What the academies got was the ability with the permission of the State Board of Education to go to a public vote and get that 5% more, and they can pay that to the academy to offset the loss of the weights. I believe the weighting study is due in December or January, long before anyone's going to a foundation formula. If that study comes back and says it doesn't cost any more to do a secondary student, their ability to pay the academies that 5% more, or up to 5%, no more than, goes away, it only remains in effect if it comes back and says, yes, it does cost more to educate a secondary student, and the legislature fails to put a weight in. Trust me, we will put a weight in because every secondary school in this state is going to be on our emails telling us they need that secondary weight. And that is the total, something that I don't think will ever come to pass. There is no ability to pay tuition for private schools. There's no ability, there's no voucher system. The goal is to get larger districts and to take in some of those schools that only operate K4, K6, K8, some are fully operating, and get there to be some consistency. But I don't know that my co-conferees have even thought this out. In the end, there were some interesting discussions in the back room in which some of us said, enough. This is it. No more. But I think in order to get the votes, again, there was just this needing to let the issue get played out. But that's it for concessions to private schools.
Thank you for giving us a little more clarity on that. Yes, Representative Tory hasn't spoken yet, and Representative White would like to say something. But we're running out of time because we have so many other issues to talk about. I do want to take an opportunity after you two speak to open it up for a couple of questions. We just had time for a couple of questions about education before we move into healthcare, which is related to education and other things. So, Representative Tory.
Great, thanks. So I did vote against the bill after initially being supportive as well. And I think for me, it was getting rattled, losing some trust in the process, and seeing the diminishment of the experts like Dr. Mike and others, seeing their role get diminished in this very important districting process. Because really, that's the work of the next, how many months? That's what we have to vote on next year, is these maps. And that process is very, very complicated. So I lost confidence in that step. That's so important. As Senator Cummings said, the bill is full of studies and backstops and if then. So it is possible that the maps that we receive won't be good enough to get our approval. And there's other things in the bill too that, it's an incremental, even though it's very holistic and integrated, there's these steps and milestones that have to be passed, including the Agency of Education having the capacity to be the leader that it needs to be. So the bill passed with reservations, but it was crafted in a careful way. So we'll see what happens.
Right. Thank you.
So just briefly, I voted in support of 454 And I just wanted to go back to what Senator Cummings was talking about with the independent schools, which I think was really important. So some of the provisions in 454, as she said, really cuts down the amount of public funding going to private schools, which I think is really important. Those 4 historic academies, the St. Johnsbury, the Burr and Burton, those function as kind of the public school in their areas because there are not public schools there. So they're kind of public-private academies. And there's, as long as I've been in this conversation, which has not been that long, but there's always been an assumption that those 4 academies really are part of the public school system. And the backstopping that Senator Cummings was talking about in terms of if they can demand more money than the foundation formula, again, it's only if there's data proving that this group of students does require more money than the foundation formula covers, and then it's either the Board of Education or the Agency of Education has to approve their request, and every town that is in that district also has to vote in approval to allow them getting more money. So it's like there's several steps in place. And as she said, if it's proven that it takes more money to educate 9 through 12th grade, for example, not just the independent schools, but the public schools also will be asking for more money to educate that group of students. The one other thing on independent schools, which I thought was important, was that, independent schools that can receive public funding under this new bill have to exist in a district where there isn't a public school serving those same students. So, that also really, I think, protects the public school funding. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a excellent calendar graphic on the legislative website that shows the schedule of all the steps that you have created for the next 5 years, and I invite everybody to look at that because I think it's very insightful. Before we move on to a couple of more important topics, I do want to give an opportunity, at least for the school board here locally, to, if you have any questions or comments at this point.
I think we've listened for an hour and 15 minutes, and I get the feeling that most people are probably here about H454. So I feel like, Candace, in your Instagram, you said come with questions, comments, and things like that. So I would just request like a shift to the agenda to make more room for that conversation.
Okay, yeah, we're really out of time, but I'll give you an opportunity when it's question and answer time if you do have comments.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Because I've taught a public school teacher at Harvard, and I also taught at an independent school, Linden Institute. And I gotta just say, comparing the special education services between those 2 high schools, it's just night and day different. Harvard provides robust special education services. Linden Institute is educational malpractice. And so the idea that those independent schools can charge more than our public school, like 5% higher, that really just rubbed me the wrong way. I feel like it's ludicrous. The state has to do a better job of making sure that those independent schools are held to high standards and there's more oversight, because it's not fair.
Okay. Can we move on and then maybe come back to H454? Is that all right? You want to focus more on H454? Okay.
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Stand up just to show. If you're here for H454.
All right, that's good to know. Thank you. All right, now let me go back to our school board. If anybody wants to talk about this topic or ask a question. And if you could please take a microphone because it's on.
I want to defer to one of the teachers in this room.
Sure.
I know they have questions.
All right, if you could come up, whoever is going to speak on the educational, the union's position.
Mr. Hitchens.
Please, more people come up because I'm sure people are getting sick of hearing me talk, but yes, my name is Matt Henshin. I've lived in Moortown for 10 years. Lived in Vermont since 97, grew up in Western New York, experienced really nice community schools, and then witnessed New York going through consolidation and closure. Eventually was out in school in Colorado, met a couple of Vermonters. They were the only kids at Colorado Mountain College that couldn't wait to get home to Vermont, to leave Colorado and come home. I asked them why, and they said it's the cheese and the community. And I think community, like that's our brand, that's what we sell. And my biggest concern is that we're taking the community out of our schools. And, you know, we have 119 districts. We have school board members who are working for free, who have been doing extremely good work, being fiscally responsible. And I will say too, like, I just want to, like, a call for open democratic dialogue, civility, transparency, comprehensiveness. You started with talking about misinformation that's out there. And I was like, I'm curious, what is that? I didn't hear any misinformation. You didn't identify any misinformation. But there's missing information. What I also didn't hear was any discussion about the impact of school closures on rural communities. The research is abundantly clear. It leads to an immediate value of property taxes, and it hastens the decline of rural communities. There's research up the wazoo, and it all says the same thing. It says that anytime this has been happened, it didn't actually save money. It did not lead to an increase in student outcomes. In fact, most cases it led to a decrease in student outcomes, and it led to a decline of the community. And so I'm hearing all of these things, and I've been hearing it for months, but what I'm not hearing is the impact on Vermont, on our communities, and on our kids. You take community out of schools, we lose the relationship-based like education that we know and love, which is performing exceptionally well. This idea that schools are failing, and the only data point that those guys use are NAEP scores, which is a test, by the way, that we do not align our curriculum to in any way, that he would use that one data point to try to argue that our schools are failing is really, it's problematic. And so I would like to know, you know, school boards, by my measure, from my data, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but school boards have actually, we've had an increase in education spending over the last 30 years of about 92%. Inflation is about 110% over that same period of time. So what that means is that school boards have been fiscally responsible. They've been doing their jobs, even though the state has asked us to pay for more unfunded mandates to deal with these social services and social safety nets out of property taxes. So we've been reducing school boards, those people that we want to replace, by who knows what, by state politicians, I don't know. They've been doing their job remarkably well. And at that same time, the state spending has gone up by twice, 200%. You ask us, they say, well, what about the per pupil spending? You know, if that's going up, there's declining enrollment. Yeah, but look at the per citizen spending of the state government. That's far greater than we're doing. So if cuts need to be made, they need to be made across the board. And we do need to ask people to chip in. If it's social services, we need to call it what it is. Social services are not in the Vermont Constitution. The right to a high quality education is. So social services should be paid for through income tax. We don't have to go all the way to an income-based model. We can have a property tax model. We can supplement with income taxes. If you got rid of unfunded mandates, period, it reduced property taxes by I don't know what. One specific example, Act 173 ended up making it easier to qualify for special ed. In our district alone at Harwood, we have 50 more kids on IEPs next year to the cost of $2 million. And school boards met that challenge. We figured it out. We've lost 50 positions over 2 years with only 2 layoffs. We did it thoughtfully, deliberately, and humanely. That's what school boards do. So when we say we don't trust you, it's not that we don't trust you, it's that we just trust our school boards more. And the one last thing, since we're talking about misinformation, I do need to check, a quick check with ChatGPT. Over the past 20 years, student enrollment has declined by 13,000, not 40,000. And if I'm wrong, correct me. And Candace, when you talk about small schools and you use the example of 3 or 4 students, that's just, I think that there's almost no schools in Vermont that do that. And cherry picking the worst examples is just, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about, I think everyone would agree that a class of 3 to 4 kids is not ideal. But if there's any misinformation that I've ever spread or anybody that, but I think starting with misinformation, like just because we're critical doesn't mean we're spreading misinformation. So I'd like to know actually, what is the misinformation you're seeing? Because you said there was a bunch out there and you didn't identify any specific misinformation.
Thank you. There's your question.
Microphone. The two things I had was that this was a giveaway to private schools. It was just, going to make it easier for private schools to take public funding, and there were going to be more of them, and we were looking at a voucher system. And I've gotten enough emails with the same phrasing to know somebody's put that out. The other one, losing my train of thought. Oh, just when that spreadsheet is, where we put that 1533, base out, and everybody looked at the impact it would have on the schools today in their particular district. Nobody ever proposed that. That was just, informational. This is what would happen. Our joint fiscal office does runs like that and a lot, but no one ever proposed that schools would be forced to go to that. The schools as they are set up now would ever be forced to go to that number. And that's, it makes it difficult. It makes it harder to have a discussion.
Anyone else want to address his comments or issues, questions? Representative Torrey.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the reference to special ed that a couple people made. There is a study on trying to understand what has been happening with special ed costs, and that is going to proceed. I'm not sure of the timing of it, but I feel a lot of desperation about next year's school budgets, and the ability to do whatever we can to take pressure off of them, including special ed, other mental health costs that have been hitting the schools. Those are levers we're going to have to try to use next year to avoid a big spike.
Do you agree with his comment that special ed is a social service and not constitutionally protected by?
Well, I don't think he was saying
Did I
that.
misunderstand?
Well, he's talking about all the other stuff, like, for example, and the reason we've done it is because they're good services to provide to children. Universal meals is not required by the Constitution, and you could maybe make the argument that you need to have that to educate them, but that's something we added to property taxes, to education spending, because we thought it was important that kids be fed and not go hungry. So there's an argument to be made that shouldn't be on property taxes, it should be from somewhere else. And so I agree with Mr. Hitchin on overall those things. There's a lot of things in there. Meeting kids' needs in schools is a good place to meet them. That's where they are. That's where they feel comfortable. They have trusted adults there. You can give them clothes, schools, mental health services. All that is a good place to do it, but it does cost a lot of money. And how we don't have the political will to raise income taxes to meet that some other way. So it's been an easy way to put it into education because all the school boards raise the money and we just raise the tax to meet it. So it's an easy way to pass those kind of taxes. Elections have ramifications and that's kind of one of them. But in general, my response to Mr. Hitchens is like, yeah, I agree with you.
I just would like to add two things to what Matt said. Number one, it is my understanding that there are schools in Vermont, not in our area, but like, for example, in the Northeast Kingdom, I think Lincoln is another example, where there are very small classrooms, like 3 and 4 kids. So I'm not talking about here, but, Vermont has some very rural areas. We think we're rural, but there are, more rural than we are. Secondly, I don't disagree at all with you in calling out how large our state government is compared to how many people live in the state. And I think going into next year and going into a year where we will not have, it's not just 70 million, I think there's another 40 million. I think we're buying down property taxes with $120 million because we had a surplus in the ed budget. So, so next year is going to be really scary. And I really think we need to be looking at what we're spending in our state government. Absolutely.
Our state budget has increased $3 billion in the last 5 years. It's unsustainable. So the educational bill is just one part. It's a major part of this increasing unsustainable budget that we have. Yes, Representative Stevens.
And that's fair because it's a hard number. But I would also point out that a lot of the money that came into the state in response to COVID is responsible for that. A lot of that money went to education, the ESSER money, which was, and I'm being very one-dimensional here, it was cash to the school districts to use as they felt was needed within a certain framework. So we need to remember that as of March 2020, we went into a very, very deep recession or depression. And the reason I can say that is because the government gave out almost $4 trillion to the states. We received our share of over $2 or $3 billion. And we see benefits from that. Of course, we kept the schools going. We kept students. We were able to start a food program. The issue with using that number as a doubling of to me, is the special extenuating circumstances. That said, it's a hard number, and and the government isn't the only ones at fault here. We didn't transition out of the COVID era very well. We used that money in a way that was given to us in a way to prevent what Senator Cummings was talking about in 2008 and 2009 with the Great Recession. When we showed up, I showed up in my first year and we were $170 million in the hole. We had to take a week off from work when the government finally had money available to understand what we could do. COVID's response was completely different. And it came and it was needed. That's the difference. That's a difference of saying that the other budget increased. It's my opinion that we just didn't get out of that mindset as smoothly as we could have, or we think we could have. And I can't say that anything that we paid for was unnecessary. I can't say that much that we paid for in the budget, even if it was not related to it, is unnecessary. I feel like we are under capacity with special education. We are under capacity with human resources. We are under capacity for some reason because we're counting better, or we're finally getting better data from the folks in the government, in the executive branch that are finally giving us information. We went from having 3,500 Vermonters, 3,500 households be homeless that we thought in January of this year, and then by May it was 5,000, and 1,000 of those were kids. It's a very difficult problem to address, and to say that we should stop everything else, because the answer isn't just housing. It's housing and services, and the money to be able to pay for that housing. And housing, as you know here, it's not just in the Valley, but in every town, everywhere in the United States, has gotten a lot more expensive than it was 5 years ago. So that does not diminish the point that you were making, Matt, at all. I just want to, I also don't want to be defensive about how we spend money, but there are nuances and there are reasons, and there's many more than just healthcare. I mean, health insurance is going to kill us next year if something doesn't happen. Being on the Appropriations Committee, we felt really good about, as good as we could feel about the budget we put forward, only to have the Joint Fiscal Office, which is a nonpartisan office that helps us crunch the numbers, come to us on May 1st and go, yeah, next year is going to be worse. And that goes for the healthcare conversation, that goes for the education conversation, that goes for all the things we're not talking about tonight. We have silos of unsustainability across government, and we're all focused here on education, which is truly, truly important. I mean, 80% of your property tax bills goes to education. 65%, is it 65% of our sales taxes go towards education? So, I'm sorry, I'm a couple years behind. All of the sales tax now goes to, and so this idea of income. So your numbers are, your numbers are real. The reasons are many, and I'm not going to hide behind any of them to say, if only we did this differently, we would be in a different place, because I think we did what was humanly possible at the time that we did it.
Is there anyone else who wants to come up? Just come on up, and please limit your question to very short comments, okay?
Hi, I'm Becky Allen. A lot of you have gotten emails from me. I think it's a quick question, I hope. I just want to know who is drawing the maps of the new districts, and what criteria will they be using? And will it be like Phil Scott's friends, or will it be people like Mike, who have our community's best interest in mind? Thank you.
Nice question, yes.
Okay. There will be, see if I can add, 13. There will be 6 legislators that will be appointed 3 and 3, not all from the same party. And there will be 5 retired school officials, business managers, superintendents, people with active knowledge of the field. This came in the House. There's actually very few changes other than that thing with the academies from the House proposal. The reason it is retired is to prevent kind of any appearance of conflict of interest. But there will be, it was felt there should be a majority of legislators, because we're the ones that are going to have to go in and do the explanation to the rest of the legislature. And it will be very difficult. The commission is to bring in 3 maps. And I think that it has to say what's the pros and cons with each map. And I believe the legislators, at least some of them, should have experience in legislative redistricting, which is a similar process and equally as popular. But that's the makeup.
Governor appoints,
Is the governor have one that?
Who's deciding
On those
the
actual
members?
people.
I am not sure. I'd have to reprint. because this-
I remember the Senate pro tem appoints the senator, the committee on committees, House Speaker does the House members. I think the governor appoints the
The
school
5
professionals.
miscellaneous people.
So the governor is the person they should lobby to.
Yes,
Okay, I'm not clear on that.
that's what I remember, but I could
Okay,
be.
I
Maybe
have to look that one up.
You can ask them to do a little research and get back to you. So next question, please.
Hi, I'm Eve Baranati. I teach at Harwood, and I've been in touch with many of you around this bill. And I'm just wanting to speak about the redistricting in particular, because I understand that as sort of the next step in all these many steps that this bill involves. I really appreciate your time coming and speaking, but also listening. I appreciate the shift in the agenda to hear what we all wanted to talk about. I teach speaking and listening actually at Harwood, and work with students, some of whom you work with, who are leaders in our school in the Harkness method or Harkness pedagogy, depending on your understanding of it. And that's about student voice and student leadership and us all listening to each other and having civil dialogue. I know Senator Cummings, you've commented before on how much you appreciate the civility in these meetings. And I think a lot of that comes from that's the ethos of our community, and our community is why I'm here. Today was our last day in the district of school. We had a little bit of a late adjournment, which I know you're familiar with. And what has really I'm thinking about on my last day of school as I come to this meeting in the evening is how much I love my job, how much I care about this community, how much I know we all care about this community. And I'm thinking about with the redistricting, I've worked in 4 districts in Vermont, some of the larger ones like Burlington and CBU, as well as Harwood and South Burlington. And I've also worked internationally at independent schools, some of the most elite international school, one of the most elite international schools in the world. And what I can say without any reservation is Harwood is by far my favorite. I love this district so much. And what I love about it is our ability to work together and our ability to collaborate and communicate, even though I'm nervous and sort of stumbling over my words right now. But this is very emotional for all of us. And I know there's a lot of practical difficulties and you're in a tough spot trying to figure out how to fund things. And what I would ask you to consider as you're thinking about the redistricting, and my understanding of it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the maps would be drawn up and voted on, and then we would have new districts starting basically a year from now. Is it 3 years? Okay.
That would be legally designated, but they wouldn't take effect, I think, for 2 years. And the Senate bill had a transitional school board, which we used in 46, or Act 46. It is very likely that once, and I wouldn't lay heavy money on our being able to reach agreement on this next year. If we can agree on a district, on districts, and if the numbers in fact seem to work, those districts would then be a legal entity, but they would not be functioning. There would probably be a transitional school board which would have to deal with, we've been told, everything from a right-of-way from the water that source that was contracted to the school 100 years ago, to the union contracts, to all the things that it's going to take. I would be surprised if we could do it in the time frame. Again, this.
It has the election starting in 27, off year is when the new districts would get elected, their new boards.
Their new boards.
November.
Well, I appreciate that clarification. My main concern is the upheaval that this is going to cause all of us, and us being able to do a great job at what we're doing currently. And as Mr. Henshin already mentioned, we do a lot of really good work, and it sometimes feels like that gets lost in these conversations. We don't need to reform everything about education in Vermont. In fact, it's some of the best in the country, and I would argue the world. But what we do want to do is make intentional decisions, and I would just beg you not to rush this, not to be bullied into voting for something, and really call on us. We are here to help. We want to work together. We want to collaborate. We clearly like to communicate. We can talk all night. I know it's really hard with what you're dealing with fiscally. And I'm just going to beg you to use all your experts to find the money elsewhere.
Thank you so much. I think we have a substitute for my role here. She's an expert in speaking and listening. So please, come on.
Hi there. My name is Jackie McCarty, and I've been a teacher at Harwood for 20 plus years. I grew up in Vermont. I came here in 1978 and went through the public education system in Vermont. In one of those really tiny schools, I did have 3 or 4 kids in my high school honors classes because we were a very tiny town before Act 60, before Act 46. We were a gold town considered with a Whitingham, which was our rival school. Now the 2 schools are unified in a union, which was a huge, difficult process. Before I go any further, I would just like to say I really thank all of you who are up here as public servants in this time in our world. To be a public servant is dangerous. So, thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for answering our emails. 'Cause I think a lot of us have written a lot. And I do appreciate it. And even when we didn't have our information quite right, you were kind enough to tell us your perspective on things. And I'm hoping that we all have the same perspective, that we want the best for Vermont kids. And as a Vermont kid, I also graduated from UVM, went to St. Mike's, so kind of a Vermont kid. And I went to a small Deerfield Valley Elementary School, which is still there. Our elementary schools stayed intact when there was a merger in the high school land. And that is what I would hope that we can try to preserve at the very least. I would also say that a high school beyond 1,000 kids in a high school is not good for the mental health of our kids. And I guess the question is, are we going to consider the anticipated mental health crisis that this could cause our kids when we're considering the costs of these changes? Because to put kids on a bus for many, many minutes or hours, I was in Wilmington, Vermont, where I grew up. We had to travel 3 hours on a bus to get to basketball games, sometimes up in Canaan, because we had to find another Division IV school. And those bus rides were really long and terrible, but I was with my team, and that was kind of fun. But when you're on a bus and you have to go, some of the worst behaviors occur on school buses, and some of the worst infractions from kid to kid happen on a school bus. And so to increase their ride time to go to a giant school that is over like 1,000 kids, I think would be really terrible for our high schoolers. So I guess my plea would be for our elementary school kids' sake. And my son's already graduated. He graduated from Harwood in 2021. I don't have any other children. I'm up there in my age, so it's not like my interest is wholly and truly the children of Vermont, and giving them the same somewhat equal experience to what I had, which I thought was an excellent education. And despite like the tiny little classes, there's also advantages to that, because you get to know your mentor, and if you have a really good one, you can learn all kinds of things from them. So I don't think we should base it all on numbers. And I feel like, and like I appreciated what you said about math, like the numbers I think get in the way of the humanity. And I think all of us are in this and living in this state because we believe in humanity, and that's sort of what Vermont is all about, and why people come here to raise their children. And so I would hate for the appeal that we have across the world as a place that you can raise children and we care about them and they're not numbers. I would hate to turn that into something else.
Thank you very much. So humanity, mental health, these are bills that affect individuals. Yes, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to comment on that. I just want to thank you for that comment. We are some years away from that potential transition happening. And I want to mention there are multiple potential off ramps that may also yet happen. But I just want to say, I'm a teacher myself. I work in the Montpelier-Roxbury School District. And I will tell you that cover of the Times Argus is burned in my brain, of the picture of the kids huddling. Oh my gosh, I'm going to cry. I'm going to stop.
It's okay.
Tell us, we haven't seen it. Take a deep breath. Tell us about the picture.
Oh, well, it's just the kids huddling and hugging as their school is closing. The Roxbury kids, yes.
I just want to thank that comment and just the spirit of the recent comments, because I think we all want the same thing. I mean, we are all here because we want the best for Vermont. And what I find really helpful from all of you is to hear your concerns, so that when we go back in January, I've heard concern about long bus rides. Like, it seems unacceptable to be on a bus for more than an hour. So, I can make a note of that. And so make sure that when we're talking further about this, that that we are looking at the length of bus rides. I mean, in transportation, I would also love to be looking at ways we can merge school busing and public transportation as a cost savings, and maybe to respond to the comment about how some of the worst bullying happens on school buses. When you've got public on there and adults, it can help assuage that situation. On the mental health comment, I just wanted to add that, one good thing in the legislature that we passed right at the end was banning cell phones in schools, and Harwood was a big inspiration for that. But I think that banning cell phones in schools around Vermont will be very beneficial to the mental health of students. So, thank you.
Okay, Senator Cummings, go ahead. I'm going to ask the next person to just come on up because we have 3 more people and very little time.
I think the hardest thing is having people think that the legislature is doing this because all we care about is numbers and we're risking kids. My 4 kids went through public schools. They all graduated from Vermont colleges. I have 4 grandsons in the public schools in Vermont. The other 2 are in Montreal. The 4 here are in poorer towns. So they are not receiving the education that the children here are receiving. I care about the public system. I care about the children. I'm not putting any child on a bus for 2 hours. I rode a bus. I know what they're like. On the other hand, I also care about those children's parents and grandparents. I would like to afford to live here so I can see my grandchildren graduate from high school here. 55% of the households half the households in Vermont are now headed by someone that is 55 years of age or older. That means they're either on a fixed income or they're approaching being on a fixed income. Our schools are very important to our communities, but so aren't the people that built those communities. And I think what I'm trying to find is the balance that allowed our communities to be the great places they are. The people that volunteered for the boards and the fire departments and the ambulance services and everything else that we've run on, that they can afford to stay in their communities and not be forced to move to Florida or Tennessee or Carolina, where they're thousands of miles away from their families. And I think that's the humanity, that's the balance we're trying to find. Nobody wants to hurt kids. Kids in central Vermont are generally getting a very good education. Children in other parts of this state aren't. We have one of the highest high school graduation rates in the country and one of the lowest continuation rates. That doesn't mean going on to college. That means going on to any kind of further training. My story is, I took my car in for servicing. When I got it home, I couldn't open the trunk. After I read the manual and found out how to open it, but I got tired of crawling in the back seat to open the trunk every time I wanted to, I took it back. They had to reprogram the computer in my Honda, it's nothing special, in order to open the trunk. The days when you could use a wrench alone to be a mechanic are over. Our kids all need exposures to robotics and to computer programming and to everything. We have examples of students who have received green and gold scholarships, full scholarships to the University of Vermont and cannot accept them because they haven't had the classes required to get in to the University of Vermont. It isn't, we have kids out there that are not getting the education they need. And we're trying to find a way to balance that, to keep our communities alive, but to also allow the people, if half of your homes get bought up by out-of-staters and are used as second homes, it's going to hurt your communities too. And, you know, I'm sure that's an issue here. Stowe is a high runner. 23% of their population is year-round. I haven't heard what it is here, but they're on the high numbers. That has an impact on your communities. We want all of you to be able to stay here if you want, but not have the cost of living here drive you out. And that, I think, is the heart of what we're trying to accomplish.
All right, let's, we have 3 more people who want to ask questions.
Asher Berg. I live in Warren. I grew up in Middlesex. One of the things that's been clear to me is that this is the beginning of a process, and a lot of the questions that I've asked have been kicked to, well, there's an off-ramp, or that's still to be decided, and that to me is scary, because we still have a lot of opportunity for this to go in a more negative direction. In the Times Argus, the governor was quoted as saying, you know, the 15,000 number is high for my liking, but don't worry, we can change that. I'm, you know, going to work on pushing that number down. So the thing that I wanted to actually share was just some feedback to this group. And that was, as somebody, and I think many members of this community who really care and want to be involved and want to work with you and want to support you in championing the right solutions for schools. It was very difficult to be involved in this process over the past couple of months. It was very difficult to get clear and accurate information. And this is for people who are really trying to do that. And I share that about the process because it's clear to me that we're going to have a whole bunch more of that, and you're going to need all of us, and we're going to really need you to get this right and to make the right decisions and to put the right political pressure in the right places so that we get to the right answer. And so I would really share that feedback, that I think that, I know this moved really quickly. We need to make sure that we go at a pace that we can bring people along, we can communicate effectively. And if we don't do that, we're not going to get to the right answer, and we're not going to bring people along. So let's make sure that we do that over the next couple of years through this process.
Thank you very much. So, more transparency, more involvement from the community, opening more channels to you. Please go ahead. And let's hold off on responses until our next 2 speakers ask their questions.
Introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Steve Rosenberg. I'm one of the Moortown reps on the Harwood School Board. Some of you are finally.
Look the mic a little closer.
Okay. I'm Steve Rosenberg. I'm one of the Moortown reps on the Harwood School Board. I would like to say that for me, and I think for many people, it was very discouraging to see that the Teachers Union, the Vermont School Board Association, the Superintendent's Association all came out against this bill, and their voices were, I wouldn't say ignored, but paid a lot of attention to. And then the final bill added the charge of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. So optics are really bad, I feel. I feel like it looks like the final version ignored the input from the people who have most at stake in the system. all the educators in their various forms. Thanks.
Thank you for your input.
Hi there, my name is Beth Gravel. I am a teacher at Harwood, and I am also a Moortown parent. And what I'd like to speak today, there's about 17 different things that I'd like to speak about. But what I'm going to focus on is the money for renovations that would be necessitated if these larger school districts end up causing mergers between schools. In our district in particular, if elementaries in our district have to merge, there's a huge cost to those renovations. And the fact that as I learned tonight, that there's a plan for it, but there's no money for it yet, that's really disconcerting. Very disconcerting. The other thing that I'd like to speak to you about tonight is I am a teacher at the Harwood Community Learning Center, which is a personalized learning program that works with small numbers of students. I work with a population of 12 with a co-teacher and a special educator. Our program provides personalized learning to any student who wants to come to us, but our population tends to be students that have low socioeconomic status, students from marginalized populations, students who might not graduate high school because of the lack of inspiration that they see in mainstream courses, and students who are exiting therapeutic environments. So those are the students that we are working with. The class size minimum is very disconcerting, because if that means that my class of, I don't know, my class size of 6 technically, because there's 2 of us, means that Eve's class is now suddenly 35 to make that average class size work. It's a pretty horrible feeling. And I feel that what we're doing is good work and has value and is bringing students along that deserve an education. So thank you.
Thank you. So,
I have a super quick response to that, which is that the class size minimums, that is a general requirement. There are many carve-outs, AP classes, special ed classes. They do not have to conform to those minimum class sizes. Those are examples. There's a whole list of carve-outs, and I could look at the bill and get that information for you.
Great. Representative Stevens wants to speak.
And just quickly to Steve's comments, we refer in shorthand to the Vermont superintendents and principals as the V's. They have representation in the State House every single day to represent the values of the superintendents, principals associations, business managers. There's also the Vermont NEA, and throughout, at least again, I'll speak for the House process, those organizations, with the exception of the Vermont NEA, were actually very much part of the conversation in creating the House bill. And the Vermont NEA, which can speak for itself, obviously, but they chose not to. And the reason, to me, having worked with them and worked with the V's in my past service as working on what we call the labor committee, was the teachers are the labor, and they're employed with contracts that are set up through negotiations, and everybody else kind of represents management, just in shorthand. And that creates a really difficult dilemma to think that we can all be in this together. This is more effective to get not only constituents but teachers. This venue is effective. It's not as effective in the State House because of the fact that most of what we're talking about, and I'm saying this knowing that the community is not only the management side of things, but when you're talking about what makes up the community in education, it is the students, it is the teachers, it is the principals, it is then the superintendents, it is the taxpayers, of which we are all at some level a taxpayer. And I think in our world, the word taxpayer doesn't really, it almost defines people who don't have kids in school anymore. And that is something that I think our committees, at least of jurisdiction, try to overcome that delineation in their conversations. And I don't think that it was entirely successful because of the fact that it was very difficult to get everybody in the same room to talk about these things. So heard, we know that we respect the communities that we're talking about. And I think what makes this hard is that someone who is simply a taxpayer is different than a taxpayer who's a teacher, or a taxpayer who's a parent, or, as we've heard tonight, a taxpayer who's all those things. Those organizations supported the House version. I think they were supportive of elements of what was happening until the very end. And that's important to know. And it's important to know why. They can explain that much better than I can. So,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to end this, but I'm going to squeeze in one more comment if you promise to be really quick.
Very quick.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Jane Regan and I teach at Harvard Union. I just wanted to respond to one quick thing about the carve out about class minimums and another thing about taxpayers. For the class minimums, it's always bothered me that the AP classes, which are already the top notch, can have a smaller class. So I would just like everyone to think about, why should the more gifted and privileged in one way or another students be allowed to be in a smaller class when actually all our kids will benefit from a lower student-to-teacher ratio. And the other thing is about the taxpayers and the property tax and all that. I've said it many times at other public meetings. Can't we think about more creative ways to fund public education, not just property taxes? Thank you for your public service.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So you have an opportunity to spend a few minutes after we end here and meet with our representatives and senators directly. But let me just give you some closing remarks, please. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here, for being so participatory and giving us a lot of information and comments and questions, giving them a lot of feedback. I hope you've learned from them as well. I think these discussions can continue offline and maintain those relationships with them. I know they have a sign-up sheet in the back if you want to be on their mailing list. It's one way to get information from them and to be in contact with them as well. I also want to thank the Big Picture for letting us use this space. Yay! And for really cranking up the air conditioning. So, we are privileged to reside in a magnificent state where a citizen legislature fosters direct engagement, blurring the lines between politicians and voters, and uniting us as one cohesive community. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful evening.
I had to come say hi.